No, I haven't. Bonsai Theology. It's finger looking good.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for episode 3 of Bonsai Theology, the podcast, the blog, the everything else that we're cramming into one name.
We're almost like the metaverse.
Do you think Craig Rochelle will preach on our site too?
Absolutely.
Did you hear about that?
Wait, no.
He started a virtual reality church for the metaverse.
What?
Pretty much all it is it's like they have a virtual reality sanctuary and then it shows the video of his sermon. The live stream.
Live streaming, yeah.
But still. And that may have been false. I saw it on Facebook under one of the production things I'm in.
I hope it's real.
What a special universe we're in.
A special metaverse we're in.
Yeah. I guess just so that people know the age of this podcast when this goes out, because we've pre-recorded these a decent amount ahead of time. We plan on launching this one the third week of January in 2022, but today is December 14th.
Yes, it's the second week of December. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all being on top of things.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. Just that way we can be behind things later on.
Absolutely. We want to work hard so we can procrastinate.
Yeah. Or so we can, continue on in our seminary studies without completely crashing and burning.
Without dropping out for our podcast.
That's about our seminary studies.
Hey, I don't know about you. I'd drop out for this.
I mean, if it started making money, okay.
Tell me right now you'll give up your dreams of going to Oxford for this. I need to know your loyalty.
Okay, just to double check. Oxford, but not St. Andrews?
Okay. You have to give up both.
Both? Oh, man. And you'll never get a doctorate either?
I'm asking you the question. This isn't pointed at me.
Well, no. But I've got to know what all's going into this. Into this decision first.
Listen, you're asking a lot of me that I feel uncomfortable answering right now.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I'll tell you what. If by the third episode of this, we get someone like Tim Mackey or N.T. Wright comment underneath and say, hey, that was pretty good. I could see you guys doing this for a career. Then we'll talk.
That, and we have to be millionaires by the third episode from our podcast.
Which I believe we both go into this with the concept that being a millionaire in ministry is bad, right?
If there's a good transition, there's none better than this, talking about work and money. Because Ecclesiastes 4 is all about theology of work, baby.
Wow. That was a good transition.
Actually, can you leave that part in the podcast where you call that brilliant?
Well, now I won't. Oh, man. That's great. Well, cool. Yeah, so we are today going through chapters 4, 5, and 6 of Ecclesiastes.
I'm gonna put a little asterisk by that and say not 5 and 6 because I got so hung up on chapter 4.
Okay, so we're doing chapter 4 today.
It's my favorite. It's probably my favorite chapter of Ecclesiastes, and I really got into it. And listen, here's my philosophy, okay? And in the words of Mark Driscoll, you can either get on the bus or get ran over by it. You can edit that part out.
No, I'm leaving that. No. I am leaving that. Oh my gosh.
No.
If you guys ever go to our website, you'll see that in our recommended websites, or not websites, podcasts. There's one called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, which is all about Mark Driscoll and his poor leadership strategies.
Yes.
So,
You don't take what I said seriously. I was mocking him. Or should I say mocking? That's kind of mean. I was doing a commentary on his theology, his leadership theology. I'm digging myself.
I don't know if that's any better. One of his common thoughts, though, was that if you're not on the bus, then you're going to be under it, right?
Yeah, something like that. Along those lines. Yeah, along those lines.
And
very
drink
toxic
whiskey and smoke cigars from the pulpit and talk about stuff that would make Song of Solomon blush. That would make Solomon blush.
Yeah. We'll just let you guys listen to it. We'll point you in that direction.
Yeah. It's a great show. Mm-hmm. Oh. Anyways, so yeah, Ecclesiastes. Do you want to just launch us on in?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'll do just a brief caveat real fast.
Yeah.
My goal, I know we've kind of been going in order with the chapters in Ecclesiastes thus far. My goal is not to cover Ecclesiastes, but kind of just to hit the points that I really enjoy and want to talk about, which, I guarantee we're not going to cover each chapter of Ecclesiastes, but I enjoy talking about what we're talking about. And if you don't like how we're not covering all of Ecclesiastes, you can go ahead and read the whole book yourself. It'll be a good time. It'll be a fruitful time.
It will be. Yeah. And our point isn't so much about being a audio commentary over the Bible necessarily. I mean, we have recommendations of those on our site. There's tons of them like Bema and then the Bible Project, those types of things that are fantastic. And I would say that those guys are much more scholarly than we are, since we've learned more from them than I think we know right now. Does that make sense? It doesn't.
I get what you're saying.
And so, yeah. And this is episode 3. We're still figuring out what we're doing.
Yeah.
But we do know that it is all hevel.
Ooh, good word.
Thank you. I learned it last week.
Yeah. First time I heard it was last week.
Is that a good plug to say, hey, listen to the last episode?
Yeah, that was good. All right, so Ecclesiastes 4, one of my favorite chapters of Ecclesiastes. It does a lot of dialogue with Proverbs, and this chapter, which I really enjoy. And Proverbs, it kind of likes to lay out like how the world is supposed to work or how it should act or with God's embedded moral order and creation. And what we find here is Kohelet kind of talking about the anomalies of that and saying how things aren't necessarily as, clear and cut as Proverbs makes it out to be. There are some instances where it supplements Proverbs. There are some instances where it's kind of subversive against the wisdom of Proverbs. So it's really cool dialogue that we'll get into a little bit. And so, it's just a really, really fun, maybe not fun, a really good chapter. I appreciate this chapter. I thoroughly enjoy this chapter.
Yeah, and honestly, it makes a lot of sense that they have common themes, both being written by Solomon, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Every single proverb.
See, this is me tying back to chapter one, episode 1.
If you're confused by that statement,
been written by Solomon.
Yeah, if you're confused by that statement, you better go listen to it.
Yep. The Lizard King may not have been the writer.
All right. Also, I need to let you know, you're going to be disappointed in me. I left my NRSV Bible in my car, so I am reading out of the NIV today.
NIV, oh man! But all right, we'll forgive you for having the NIV.
Okay,
it's still a good.
It is. It's a good translation. That's a good translation.
You do have the 70s version, right?
The 70s? Oh, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, it's the only one to read.
Honestly, the new one. What do they think we are?
Yeah, get that out of here.
People that want good Greek?
They think language progresses? Doubt.
As if our understanding of the Dead Sea Scrolls should impact our understanding of Greek or the Bible.
No, it shouldn't. So we find Kohelet opening up his next observation, and this next observation it sheds light on the oppression of his day, and it says, "Again, I looked and saw all the oppression that was taking place under the sun." That's Ecclesiastes 4, verse 1. And so this is we see a continuation of actually what's found in chapter 3, verses 16 through 22, which we actually didn't get to in our last episode. We kind of got hung up on verses 1 through 8 of chapter 3. But this is a continuation of that conversation in which Kohelet is observing and critiquing like the social injustice that's occurring in his time period. And then we find that the phrase all the oppression, that just denotes the pervasiveness of the oppression that is just occurring constantly in all areas of life. This was very much a time of oppression. And then an interesting note with under the sun, when we talk about that in reference to the Hellenistic area or the Ptolemaic kingdom, in that time period, we find that Judah was part of the Syrian and Phoenician province in the Ptolemaic kingdom. And this was a time when the Greek elite pervaded the kingdom, and wealth or leading families in Jerusalem were like assimilating into these Greek elites. And so this led to the upper class just oppressing the underclass. And this would have looked like the institution of debt slavery, and families would have ended up like being sold into slavery because they were just unable to pay their debt. And so just regardless of time period, wherever you date Kohelet or Ecclesiastes, regardless of the time period, Kohelet is referencing the economic and political abuse of power, which led to just this great oppression of the underclass. And that's the conversation that's going on here and his observation.
Yeah, and like last time we were talking a little bit about like how this is almost a commentary on capitalism too, because very much so like what they're talking here is that political use of money can absolutely lead to power, which leads to oppression.
Yeah. You're spot on with that. And as we get more into the chapter and talk about Kohelet's theology of work, that comes into play some more. So exciting stuff. But reading on, we find that just the absolute horror of this observation of this economic oppression under the sun. This horror evokes a response of great horror and great pain from Kohelet. He says, "The tears of the oppressed, there is no one to comfort the oppressed." And he says, "The power is on the side of the oppressors." And so this then we
such
find
a dark time for you to laugh. I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
The tears of the oppressed.
I know, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah. But this lament and this bemoaning, this leads to his cry of praise for the,
Sorry, oppression is so funny. It's not. Oh, man.
But this leads to his cry of praise for the dead because they don't have to experience the horror of oppression anymore. Mm. And then even greater than that, Kohelet says, are those who were never born at all because they never had to lay their eyes on this sick and twisted oppression, which I think is kind of ironic because we find that Kohelet's experience is him journeying and taking on the quest to find meaning in life. And he kind of explicates that the great meaning and happiness is found in not being born at all. And so it's kind of ironic.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not very informed on this strain of philosophy, but there was a Nerdstalgic video about, I've got something with this. No, I don't, maybe. There was a Nerdstalgic video about Attack on Titan that was talking about one of the characters who his entire philosophy was that they need to stop having babies because even having a baby is allowing them to have pain, and how that's unethical to bring someone into this world knowing that they are going to have pain and suffering in their life because that's unavoidable.
Yeah.
And that kind of sounds like what he's talking about here.
Yeah.
That idea. And I'll try to find what that's called and put in the footnotes or whatever, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of, not even kind of, it's just a really dark thought, because he's saying the meaning that you can find is just out of the grasp of human beings, because you can't help that you were born.
Mm.
So it's just a really, really dark thought and an ironic twist to his pursuit. But I think something that we should know, something I think is important, is that Kohelet's grief is an intellectual one, since he's not experiencing the oppression himself, but he's just observing it. But it still makes his grief no less valid. And I think that speaks to the empathy or the sympathy we should have for those who are experiencing great hardships and great oppressions, even if we don't experience them ourselves. We should still be greatly affected by the hurts of the world, even if we aren't experiencing those ourselves. Then we should feel hurt, and we should want to reach out and try to fix that system in any way we can.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's the first 3 verses of chapter 4. Start on a pretty light note. But moving on to verses 4 kind of through 12, this is where I really got hung up on, because now we get into Kohelet's theology of work. And I think this can speak some really, really good things into at least the culture we're in as Americans, and how Americans view work as, and that's where your value is. You need to work as much as you can, get as much as you can, be as productive as you can, because that's where you find your value.
Yeah.
And so this next passage was very convicting for me in that pursuit, and I'm very excited to talk about it. And so verse 4, Kohelet says, "And I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind." And so we find that hard work, which involves just massive amounts of energy and earned skills acquired through many years of experience, it seems only to be motivated by jealousy and rivalry, with one's neighbor. My translation said a person's envy of another. It can also be translated as an envy of a neighbor. And so hard work and rivalry seem to be interconnected. And just a brief side point, while rivalry and competition can have its benefits, I think it can be good in some aspect. And in fact, rivalry among like the divine to human and marriage relationship found in the Hebrew scriptures, that's kind of the norm. But Kohelet is taking another route, and he chooses, in a sense, to kind of supplement Proverbs 14:30, which says, "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy and rivalry rots the bones." And so we find that Kohelet never condones a type of healthy competition or offers encouragement for people to do all they can to be the best they can be, but rather he seems to state that these are excuses made by those who are just so consumed by their work and so consumed by their jealousy of their neighbor. Mm-hmm. And speaking of neighbor, I think that adds another ironic twist. And it should call us to remember Leviticus 19:18, which is the famous "love your neighbor as yourself." And so the commitment and the command to love one's neighbor was replaced with the attempt to outdo and outwork one another. And Kohelet says that this is chasing after the wind, or trying to shepherd the wind. And so if this is what motivates our work, then we need to ask ourselves, is it better than to just not work at all? Because that is a very toxic kind of mindset and a very toxic kind of work.
Yeah, one of my favorite footnotes I've seen about this was for that herding the wind type thing, is that it's like herding a bunch of cats.
Yeah.
It's pretty impossible to do. And like one of the examples that came to mind, specifically because of like that thought of capitalism or those types of things, is that there's a point where having the money isn't even enough. Like one of the tactics that Amazon has, which if you look in our footnotes, we have Amazon links and everything like that. It's one of those things that just exists now. But Amazon is very well known for Amazon Basics, going through and undercutting different brands that are homegrown brands and things, and just taking their place. And that's a very common thing to have happen.
Yeah.
And that sounds a lot like this unhealthy kind of competition.
Yes.
I'm not sure if I would say that it's necessarily an envious thing. It would be shocking to me to find out that Jeff Bezos is envious of anyone other than Elon Musk.
Hey, person of the year. Person of the year. Not Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk. Apparently.
Yeah. Jeff Bezos just had like the song of the year written about him. So
Yeah. True.
Jeffrey Bezos.
That's Bo Burnham, just in case anyone didn't know.
Yeah, it's not a TikTok original.
Yeah. But yeah, so verse 4 is this observation that the hard work that Kohelet is observing is very much motivated by jealousy and rivalry with one's neighbor, which he views as very toxic and very unhealthy. And then it's kind of funny because in verse 5, Kohelet, he seems to anticipate like some backlash to his view on work. And it says, fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. And so that fools fold their hands, that just means that like hands or arms that are folded, they aren't able to do anything. All right. They're useless, they're rendered useless. And so this is a commentary on idleness and laziness, in that only fools are idle, only fools are lazy. And then that next line, and they ruin themselves, a funny translation, it can be translated as well, is eats his own flesh. And so a fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. And so essentially what's being said is that laziness results like in this cannibalistic state in which the idle or the lazy person literally kills themselves through starvation because they're not doing anything. Mm. And this is kind of in line with, there's a proverb, Proverbs 6:10 through 11, that says, a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest, and poverty will come on you like a thief, and scarcity like an armed man. And so that's kind of another part where Kohelet is in dialogue with the author of, or whoever wrote this proverb. But we find that in verse 6, Kohelet puts a spin on that previous aphorism, and he says, I just lost my place. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. And so that one handful of tranquility, the tranquility can also be translated as relaxation. And this is a noun that derives from the verb that is used to denote like resting and relaxing after doing some work. So like Exodus 20, verse 11, when it says that, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. And so what Kohelet is saying is that it's better to have a hand of work and a hand of relaxation than to have two hands full of work. And so he's urging his audience to find a better work-life balance. One shouldn't throw their lives into laziness. One shouldn't throw their lives into work. You need to avoid both of those extremes. But you need to work just enough to get by instead of working your way into unnecessary excess. He's very much harping on you need to find a good place in the middle. Don't overwork yourself, because that's meaningless and that's chasing after wind. But don't do nothing. Don't be lazy, because that too is meaningless and chasing after the wind.
Yeah, something that I find fascinating when it comes to that balance is Rabbi David Foreman. Mm-hmm. He is probably one of my favorite Old Testament scholars, and he talks about how Genesis 1, one of the biggest themes in it is rest, because the universe starts in rest and it ends in rest. And not the universe, God. Starts in rest and ends in rest.
Edgy.
Yeah, really edgy. I'm going very Rob Bell there. No, but it begins and ends in that rest. And that is a very important thing, because there's all this work being done, whether you come from the creationist standpoint, evolutionist, whatever, it's still showing the work of God is surrounded by rest, and how one of the biggest calls to not just Jews but followers of Christ is this rest. but you can't have rest unless you're willing to put in the work to have that rest. And like that's just a very important thing. But your work is not valued unless you have rest, because then it's just pointless.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I found that to be a fascinating thing, talking about that rest in the 6 days. I know you went to Exodus and not Genesis, but
Might be.
yeah, ka. You're going to the Word though, so I will.
Then moving into verses 7 and 8, it seems to be a translation. He says, again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. And so that again kind of denotes a transition into a different topic. But I still think that this passage is offering a theology of work. And in these verses, we have a man with no family who busies himself constantly with his work. And it says in verse 8, there is a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother. There was no end to his toil, and yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. And so there was no end to his toil. This can also be a reference to like the fruits of his labors, or to all the wealth that he was amassing through the work he was doing. But however, no matter the amount of wealth he earned, it said his eyes were not content. And something I find really interesting and really cool is that in Semitic line of thought, the eyes were seen to be the throne of desire. And so this man's desire for more wealth, for more work, for more increase, it was never satisfied. And what Kohelet is saying is that it will never be satisfied. And there's a really cool proverb that I think speaks to this proverb, Proverbs 38, the second half of 8 through 9. And it says, give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I will have too much and disown you and say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of my God. And so Kohelet is very much just harping on the pursuit of excess as something meaningless and chasing after the wind. But then we find that the man, he kind of throws his hands up in exasperation, and he bemoans how he's working for nobody. He has no wife, no children, no parents, no siblings, and he is depriving himself of all enjoyment and all good things, which I think is kind of really sad and depressing in light of chapter 2, verse 24 of Ecclesiastes, which states that work and pleasure should not be in tension with one another, but that they shouldn't disparage the other. And this man seems to have forgotten that. You know, it was mentioned 2 chapters ago, and he had already forgotten this principle and threw himself into his work, and he was profoundly unhappy. And with that, there's actually a passage I want to read from Martin Luther, which I have my problems with Martin Luther, but I think what he says here is pretty profound. And he says, therefore, the best thing is to enjoy the things that you have in the present, to do everything in the present, and to let what is evil flow past you. But if you want to go beyond this and mingle with the world, straighten every curve, cure every evil, and throw Satan out of the world, you will cause yourself nothing but labor and sorrow. And so we just find that Kohelet is really trying to get across that if you make your life all about work and all about excess and all about gathering wealth, you will live a very lonely and unfulfilling and unsatisfied existence. And so you need to take time to rest and to have relaxation, because also that's part of loving your neighbor. I mean, if you spend your life constantly trying to outwork and outdo your neighbor, that is very much unloving. And so even part of embodying love is to step back and relax.
Oh, yeah. Which
I think, for me, I really needed to hear as a full-time student and someone really trying to push themselves to do well so I can go on and go to another good school and just constantly push myself. If I truly want to love those around me, then I need to take a step back and have one hand of work and one handful of relaxation.
Yeah. The first person I heard this from was John Ortberg, but I'm sure it's a concept from far before him. But it says that sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is to take a nap.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Amen. Amen.
Oh,
So that's verses 7-8. We come to verses 9-12, and we kind of see more theology on work and some theology on community. And we have two are better than one because they have good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to hold them up. Also, if two lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves, and a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Now, there is a doctor of the church, and by doctor of the church, I just mean there was an ancient theologian who was very influential in forming the Big C Church, the Universal Church's theology and doctrine. But there's a doctor of the church by the name of Jerome, and he allegorized these verses, and with 2 is better than 1. He said this is in reference to Jesus being with the Father, and in the verse that one can help the other up, he says this is in reference to Christ lifting up the brokenhearted and the broken-spirited. And even though I might sound like a bad Christian when I say this, I don't think we should do this. I don't think that's how these verses should be read. I think it is still speaking to the importance of work being done in community, not in solitude, and maybe even speaking to how the spiritual walk should be done with others. And so we find that Kohler is saying that pursuit of wealth and pursuit of work and meaning of life alone leads to a highly unsatisfactory life, and that you should surround yourselves in community.
Yeah. And something to be said with that Jerome, I haven't heard much about him, but I'm sure he was a brilliant theologian.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But there's something to be said that the Old Testament stands on its own. Mm-hmm. It is greatly enriched with the presence of Jesus, the presence of the New Testament, Second Temple times, whatever you want to call it. But that doesn't take away the fact that the Old Testament stood on its own for, centuries and has its own meaning without our understanding of Jesus.
Yeah.
Our understanding of Jesus can enrich it, though. Yeah. So that's just what was coming to mind with that, because, Jesus is awesome, but I think that we can sometimes water down theology by trying to force him in things that he wasn't in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like you were saying, I think we do these texts a great disservice if we try to force Jesus into every single aspect of the Hebrew Scriptures, because, like you said, they do speak on their own, and there's a lot of really profound truths to be read or to be learned by those scriptures without having to force Jesus into them. And I think even trying to force Jesus into them, I think there's a disservice to Jesus as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We need to be careful with that.
Yeah. So when I was younger, I grew up in a very fundamentalist homeschool home. I've talked to my parents about this. This isn't me throwing them under the bus. They're well aware, and they have changed quite a bit.
Okay.
But the history books that we would go through very much so would reframe American history and other histories to make it sound like the good guys, aka whoever wrote the history books, were always very Christ-centered, and the only reason everything worked out for them was because Jesus was at their forefront, which just isn't always the case.
Yeah.
And we see throughout American history devastation that was caused because whoever conquered was the more powerful, and not because they were the ones that were following Jesus' call, or God's call, however you want to say that. And so it's important to remember that, yes, Jesus has a hand over everything, but don't force him into the areas that he's not in, not like that in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree.
Over contextualize that stuff.
Yeah. That's a good word.
Yeah.
And last but not least, a passage I think might ruffle some feathers, but I think that's good, is 13-16. Better a poor man, or a poor but wise youth, than an old but foolish king who no longer knows how to heed a warning. The youth may have come from prison to the kingship, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom. And I saw all that who lived and walked under the sun followed the youth, the king's successor. And there was no end to all the people who were before them, but those who came later were not pleased with the successor. And this too was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. And so this is a passage that is very much going against a proverb. There was a proverb 30:22. Let me read that real fast. That says, and just to give some context, this is a proverb about it's presenting things that are kind of upside down to the world, things that go against how the world order should be. And so what the author is saying is that this is not a good thing. And he says, a servant who becomes king, and that servant can also be translated as boy or youth, because boy suggested a servant or a slave or just a young member of a family. And so a boy, a youth, a servant, a slave who becomes king, this author says, is very contrary to what the world. In Ecclesiastes, Kohelet is saying it's better for a poor but wise youth than the old but foolish king who no longer knows how to heed a warning. And so he's saying it's best if we find someone who has a more energy and is not as set in their ways and as stubborn. Maybe they are stubborn, but not as stubborn. It's better for someone who is young maybe to be in positions of leadership than it is to have someone like an old, set in their ways, stubborn king, which very much goes against even ideology today, that seniority and like eldership goes hand in hand with insight and with power. And Kohelet is saying that's not always the case. It's sometimes foolish to heed every single word that older people in leadership say, and that sometimes the best thing you can do is to lift up the young. While they may be poor and not in a great situation as you would want a leader to be in, they're not rich, they're not wealthy, and all that stuff, but they're still wise, they're still energetic, and it's better maybe to lift those people up than to continually let old kings sit in their throne and be super stubborn. So.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. That just triggered a conversation I had with Dusty, one of the mentors of our show, where he said a very quotable statement completely by accident that was so much more profound than I think he even was thinking, which was, you're either coachable or combustible. And yeah, I feel like that kind of summarizes that idea.
That was really good. Oh man, that was really good.
Yeah,
and the examples he uses is the youth may have come from a prison to the kingship. That should remind the audience of Joseph, who was in prison in Egypt, who was taken from prison to help explain the meaning of Pharaoh's dreams, and that led him to positions of power. And then, or he may have been born in poverty within his kingdom, kind of represents David as a lowly shepherd who was then exalted to being the king. And so he's saying there's a lot to be said about those boys who are in those positions and what they have to offer in the world, and how we just shouldn't outcast those who aren't in favorable conditions or in situations like we want people to be in. So that's all I got.
No, that was awesome, man. Yeah. So I guess to summarize it all up, capitalism bad, God good? No.
Absolutely.
Maybe not quite. But yeah. No, I think that this came up with some very important ideas of the rest and still work. That was the big theme that I heard, along with the being willing to learn. And that's just some powerful stuff. And when it's applied, holy cow, that can change lives.
Yeah. What a world we would live in.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Well, yeah, do you have any final statements for the show?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, to everyone that's listening or watching, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll have all the show notes either linked in the description below or on our website at bonsaitheology.com. If you guys want to contact us, it's contact@bonsaitheology.com. And you can find us on Instagram and YouTube and our website and all that stuff. So, yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah, have a wonderful day, and I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Goodbye.